Hi, and thanks for joining me. So today's really about building understanding, not just knowledge. So as a carer of myself and someone living with an eating disorder, I know how incredibly confusing this journey can be. So what we might see on the outside often doesn't match what's actually going on underneath for our loved one. Today, I'm going to attempt to unpack that for everyone. So, what we're going to be looking at is what eating disorders really are beyond their stereotypes, why they happen, and what purpose they might be serving, what you might notice, especially at home, and most importantly, how to respond in ways that actually help. So, this isn't about getting everything right, or it's not about being perfect. It's about those small shifts in understanding and response. And those small shifts can build connection and safety over time. So let's get into it.
I just want to highlight that this presentation is based on lived experience and also some publicly available resources. It's for information and support only, and it's not a substitute for professional, medical, or mental health advice. Please take what is helpful for you and leave what's not. If anything shared today feels triggering or overwhelming, I gently encourage you to seek some support. Okay, let's get into it. So, what is an eating disorder? An eating disorder is a serious mental health condition. And what I've found that it's often really misunderstood because from the outside, it just looks like it's a choice around food and its behaviours around food. But in reality, it's actually much more complex than that. So, eating disorders actually involve thoughts, and these thoughts can become so overwhelming, persistent, and really intrusive for a person. They also involve emotions, and often these emotions can be really confusing or they can be difficult to manage or just become really intense. Eating disorders also involve behaviours, and these behaviours develop as a way of coping or creating a sense of control. And it also can impact someone's physical health, and that can be in a really serious way, and sometimes it actually can be life threatening. So, for many people, eating disorders aren't actually about food and just food. What the food becomes is the way that the distress actually shows up. So it sort of becomes a language for things that feel too hard to express, such as anxiety or fear or shame or even a need for control. So sometimes it can feel like if I can control this, then I can cope. Sometimes it can be that this is the only way I know how to manage my feelings. So over time, these patterns become really deeply ingrained. And it's not that the person wants that to happen, but it's because the brain and the body begin to rely on those patterns. Eating disorders don't develop overnight, they develop gradually. So, what may start out as something small or even seemingly harmless can slowly take over and start to take up much more space. And then it can begin to affect their thoughts, their behaviors, their relationships, and just their daily life. And what's also important to remember is that eating disorders affect the whole person, not just their relationship with food, but it affects their sense of self, it affects their identity, their relationships, and just their ability to engage in everyday life. And that's why it's really important to understand the full picture. Because when we only focus on the food, which is what people think it's about, we can actually miss what's really going on underneath. And when we begin to understand what's actually sitting underneath the surface, then we can respond with much more compassion, less frustration, and we can create a space where recovery actually feels possible.
What I'm about to talk about might be confronting for some, so please take care of yourself. So, I want to gently highlight some of the realities of eating disorders. Eating disorders are not just difficult, they are serious and they can be life-threatening. Research shows us that eating disorders have the highest mortality rate of all mental illnesses. That means more people lose their lives to eating disorders than to conditions like depression or substance use disorders. I don't know about you, but I actually found that quite confronting when I first read that. It is also being found that anorexia nervosa has the highest death rate of all eating disorders. And this is due to medical complications like heart strain, organ damage, and the long-term effects of malnutrition. And I think it's also important to acknowledge here that suicide can also be a risk. And this is due to the emotional and psychological distress alongside the illness. So to me, this really highlights that eating disorders are both physical and mental illnesses at the same time. And I know it can feel a lot to take in, but this helps us understand why early support and intervention are really important. In Australia, it's estimated that over 1.1 million people are currently living with an eating disorder. So this is something that affects many individuals, families, and communities. But despite this, eating disorders are often not spoken about in the same way as other health issues. In fact, it's been found that more people die from eating disorders each year than from the national road toll. And yet, there isn't always the same level of awareness or urgency. And because of this, eating disorders are often underdiagnosed, misunderstood, and underfunded. So what this means in real life is that there are many individuals and families out there navigating something incredibly complex, often without the level of understanding and support they truly deserve. There are a number of different eating disorders and each one looks very different. You might be familiar with anorexia nervosa, bulimia, and binge eating disorder. But there's also others like OSFID, which is actually very common, ARFID, which doesn't always involve body image, and PICA, which many people don't often hear about. But what's important to understand is that there is no, quote marks, one look for an eating disorder. They don't always involve weight loss, and they don't always fit neatly into categories. Two people who have the same diagnosis may actually look completely different. And someone can be really struggling even though it doesn't look like it from the outside. Over the next few slides, I have a description and some information about each of the eating disorder types that you can just read through at your own leisure. Okay, let's have a look at what you might notice at home because this is often where it becomes very real. So you might start to notice some increased tension around meals. There might be more arguments or sometimes complete shutdowns. There might be ongoing negotiations around food, like the types and the amounts. And then you might also notice there might be some emotional reactions that just feel a little bit bigger than the actual situation. You may also notice some changes in personality, some increased anxiety and irritability. You may notice that they're spending more time alone. You may even notice some secrecy around food or other behaviours. And you may also notice rigid routines that feel really important to them. And meal times. Meal times can become incredibly difficult at times. To be honest, they can actually feel like a battleground, not just for your loved one, but for everyone involved. And you, as the parent or the carer, this can feel really exhausting, emotional, and at times completely and utterly overwhelming. And if that's where you are right now, you're not alone in this. So when we notice some of these changes, just because we notice one doesn't mean that your loved one has an eating disorder. But when we start to see a pattern or multiple signs appearing together, or when we see changes that are persistent and escalating, that's when it's important to gently start taking notice. Because early recognition really does matter. It's not about jumping to conclusions and trying to get it all perfect. It's about staying curious, trusting your instincts, and being willing to lean in rather than step back. Because you, as the parent or carer, you are often the very first to notice that something isn't quite right. Along our journey, we've come across a lot of myths around eating disorders. And even when these have been said with good intentions, they can actually be really harmful. Things like, it's a diet gone wrong. Only girls get eating disorders. They just need to eat more. Just give her a banana. I wish I had their willpower and their self-control. These ideas can create frustration, blame, and misunderstanding. And when the reality is, eating disorders are not a choice. They're not a diet gone wrong. They aren't about willpower and self-control. They are complex mental health conditions. They don't just affect girls. They can affect anyone regardless of their age, gender, or size. And when we challenge these myths, we open up the door to compassion. And compassion changes how we respond and how others respond. I want to introduce a really important shift in how we understand eating disorders, because often we look at the behaviours and we think, why are they doing this? But a more helpful question is, what is this doing for them? Eating disorders don't just appear for no reason. They often serve as a function. They become a way of coping, a way of managing something that feels overwhelming. And for young people, the eating disorder can have many functions. It can create a sense of control because when everything else feels uncertain or chaotic, food, routines, and rules can feel predictable and safe. They can reduce anxiety or distress because restricting, binging, or exercising can temporarily lower anxiety in that moment. Even though it's not helpful long term, it feels like it works short term. Eating disorders can also help avoid or numb difficult emotions. So things like fear, sadness, anger, or overwhelm can sometimes feel way too much to sit with, whereas the eating disorder can become a way of blocking or distracting from those feelings. Eating disorders can provide a sense of identity and purpose. For some, it can become a big part of how they actually see themselves. It can give them a sense of structure, achievement, and even belonging. Eating disorders can function as a way of communicating distress. Because sometimes it's not about the words, it's the behaviours that are saying, I'm not okay, I'm struggling. And it's really important to understand that just because the eating disorder serves a purpose does not mean it's helpful or healthy. It can come as a huge cost, like physically, mentally, emotionally, and socially. But when we understand the function, it helps us respond differently. So instead of seeing defiance, resistance, and non-compliance, we can actually start to see coping, fear, and unmet needs. And from a carer's perspective, this shift was really important because it helped me move from frustration to understanding. It didn't make it easier, but it made it make more sense. Because if we're only focusing on stopping the behaviour without understanding what's it doing for the person, we risk taking away their coping strategy without giving them something else to replace it. So the goal isn't just to remove the eating disorder, it's to help the person find safer, healthier ways to meet those same needs. Support doesn't have to be perfect to make a difference, because in fact, it rarely is. But what does help is listening, and listening without jumping in to try and fix it. It's also important to validate. So validating how your loved one may be feeling, even when you don't fully understand it. So you might say something like, I can see this feels really overwhelming for you. And you may even ask them to explain that to you. And if they don't want to, because they haven't got the words, that's okay. It's really important to stay calm even when things feel really intense. So take a breath, ground yourself, and just let your loved one know that you're there. Let them know that you're there to support them and to get through it together. Being present, even when it's uncomfortable, is so important, because with you sitting there with them through a mealtime, even if you don't know what to say or they don't know what to say, that is so important, because your presence it just makes a world of difference for them to know that they're not alone and that they've got someone to help them. And at times it can be really hard, especially when things are really overwhelming, when things are really intense, or when you're feeling really worried or even scared. Because everything in us wants to just fix it. We want to say the right thing. We want it to go away. But creating a sense of safety isn't about having all the right answers. It's not about having the right words. It's not about getting it perfect. Creating safety is about being there. It's about being consistent. It's about being gentle. It's about being there with no judgment. I want to take a pause here for a moment and speak to you directly as a carer. This journey is hard. There's no perfect way to do this. I wish it came with a manual. I wish it even came with a magic wand that I could give you that you could wave and it would make everything less hard. I'm going to be honest, there will be times when you don't know what to say. You will have times when you say something and you wish you hadn't have said that. And there will be times when you feel so overwhelmed and really exhausted. And I want you to know this does not mean that you are failing. This actually just means that you are a human and it's okay. Because you are here learning, you're trying, and you're showing up every day for your loved one. And honestly, that is what matters most to them, is that you are present and that you are trying and that you are doing your very best. It doesn't have to be perfect. I don't know about you, but when we first started this journey, I just wanted to jump in and fix everything. I thought I had to make all these big changes to make a difference to my loved one. But actually, in reality, it wasn't. It was the small things that mattered the most. So it was the listening instead of correcting. It was staying present instead of getting frustrated and walking away. It was responding calmly instead of reacting. All these really small moments made the big difference. They made the huge impact. And they actually built something that was really important, which was trust. And then that trust created safety. And it was with that feeling of safety that allowed some changes to happen. So let's sum up what we've learnt. Eating disorders are not random and they don't appear for no reason. They serve a purpose. Even if from the outside it doesn't make sense, on the inside it does. Because your person, they might be coping or protecting or managing something that feels really overwhelming. They're not a choice. This isn't about stubbornness. It's not about gaining attention. And it's definitely not about someone just needing to try harder. What you're seeing is someone battling something that feels incredibly powerful and very real to them. Eating disorders are driven by fear and not defiance. So what may look like resistance is often fear. And it's fear of change, fear of losing control, and fear of what happens if that eating disorder isn't there anymore. So when someone says no, it's often not them saying no, it's the fear speaking. And this is where our responses become so important. So understanding reduces frustration. Because when we understand what's underneath the behaviour, we can stop taking it personally. We can stop seeing it as defiance and start seeing it as distress. And that shift alone can change everything. Connection supports recovery. It's not control. It's not perfection. Not having all the right words. It's connection. It's feeling safe. It's feeling seen. And it's feeling supported even in those hardest moments. This is what helps someone to begin to move forward. And I just want to remind you, this is not about being perfect and getting everything right. You're going to get it wrong sometimes. You're going to feel frustrated and you're going to have moments where you don't know what to say or do, and that is okay. So please be kind to yourself. This is about being present, showing up, staying, trying again, even when it's hard and even when it's really uncomfortable. Because presence builds trust, trust creates safety, and safety is what allows recovery to begin. Just want to say thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time to listen and to learn. And most of all, for being open to understanding something that can be really complex. The way we understand and the way we respond can make a real difference. And remember, you're not alone in this. So please reach out if you require any support. And remember, always be gentle with yourself.